Capitalism is an organism. It's like an organism. That means it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's also quite like an organism in that it mutates to survive. Those of you who have studied economic history or have even watched a documentary will have seen it mutate from the Industrial Revolution through the Age of Empire, through the 20th century with its massive economic state machines, through to now. I think we got wrong what the end is going to be. In the 20th century, we imagined the end of capitalism would be forced by the will of some people I'm going to talk about, and that it would take the form of an increasingly statized society. I'm going to argue something different. Who wants to see a picture of capitalism morphing to survive? Somebody. Right. These are the Kondratiev waves. This is not my graph, but what can we see there? The red line is a schematic representation. The black line is for real. That's US stock prices. And what you can clearly see is 4 bull markets at the peak of 50-year long cycles, which the Soviet economist Nikolai Kondratiev put his name to. Joseph Schumpeter also wrote about them, calling them the Kondratiev waves. The rest of this data is confusing, to be honest, but you can see on the green line 4 clear peaks in consumer prices. It goes a bit haywire in the 4th wave, what we know as the post-war economic boom, the 50s, the Doris Day era. But you can, even if the evidence for waves is a bit like the evidence for black holes. That is, we see it in the disturbance of data around them rather than any concrete, touchable evidence. I take the waves to be evidence of the metamorphosis of capitalism. The most clear one is the one that takes place between the 2nd and 3rd wave, when monopolies arise, when free markets become a dirty word. Competition is destructive, said Theodore Weil, the boss of Bell Telecom, the first network theorist. So the question is, what's it going to be like in the 5th wave? Okay, I run ahead. The explanation for these waves, the modern, most fashionable explanation for them, is that they're driven in their initial 10 years by a wave of technological innovation. So you get the spinning jenny, the cotton mule in the first wave. The second wave is the age of steam and the telegraph. The third wave is the age of the telephone, the radio, the blast furnace, the machine gun. And the 4th wave, the mainframe, the transistor, the jet engine. Carl Otto Perez is the modern economist most associated with this, but Schumpeter himself basically pioneered the understanding that capitalism is driven and metamorphoses through these waves of tech innovation. Kondratiev argued something else. He argued that each wave represented the exhaustion of a business model for capitalism, which we would now call a mode of accumulation. So that the free market in wave 2 gives way to the non-free market, the monopoly, the statized market of wave 3. Wave 4 is the global corporation. So what's wave 5? Well, you're living through, I would argue, a kind of messy and messed up start of the 5th wave. Messed up by the fact that financial conjuring during the fourth wave managed to delay and delay and delay the crunch that comes at the end of every wave. The crash, the liquidation, the thing that forces new technologies to be deployed en masse and wipes out old companies. That's been delayed by completely printing money in the 90s, by responding to the dot-com crash by printing more money. This leads to the crash we've just lived through, to which the solution has been to print more money. Bad companies are never liquidated. But meanwhile, the tech innovation cycle has begun. You're sitting through it. That's the reason you're here on your little stools, because you are interested in it, and you know it. Those of you who are pointing iPads at me are the visual proof of it. I will argue that Wave 5 is certainly composed of these characteristics. The network is replacing the hierarchy. The network, as Kevin Kelly said, is the innovation. He said this in 1996 in his famous Wired article. It's not the computer. Everything we're going to do with computers has been done with computers. The real innovation is the network. The second thing is the rise of information goods. You're consuming them now. You've got them on all these tablets and phones that you're writing on. And information goods, as we will see, are very interesting. The third thing is the rise of non-hierarchy. So I could have said the network as an organization rather than the network as a technology. But I'll use the word non-hierarchy. The sociologist Manuel Castells points out increasing numbers of modern, that is 21st century organizations work through non-hierarchical structures. Whether it's an Occupy movement, whether it's a co-op, whether it is some companies. Google, at a certain phase in its existence, worked like a network. Many of us, the virtual company, those of you who work in them, work through network-style organizations as well as network technology. And I will also point out that this is the first period in capitalism's history where states decided to organize the market to drive carbon emissions down. They've decided to organize the market before to create full employment or to win a war in World War I or World War II. But this time, the market is being organized to drive down carbon emissions. And that is a new feature. That's something that isn't economically determined, it's ecologically determined, but nevertheless, it complicates and adds to our picture. But if this is the emerging new economy, we have some questions. Who are the bearers of this new set of things? People like Theodore Weil brought the 20th century to us. People like Richard Arkwright brought 19th century industrial capitalism. He understood what it was and pioneered it. Wedgwood. Who are the people who are pioneering the fifth wave of capitalism is the first question. So the question Peter Drucker, one of Schumpeter's pupils, asks. There have to be new people, new men, he says, to bring this thing. That's the first question. But the bigger question is this. I don't think that's a form of capitalism. I don't think networked, non-hierarchical, increasingly collaborative economic organization is a form of capitalism. Or if it is, it's a form of capitalism that is going to challenge some basic assumptions we have about capitalism. And here is why. Paul Romer, in his famous paper, Non-Endogenous Growth, in 1990, pointed out that information goods are unlike any other commodity that has ever existed, in that they destroy what economists call the price formation mechanism. You no longer get scarcity where prices are then determined in the market by supply and demand, because for information goods, unless they can be protected in some way, the supply of them is unlimited. So every single one of us on Earth could own every iTunes track that has ever been created now. In fact, it would be called sharing, because you don't even own them. Apple owns them for now, but we could all collectively own them for nothing. We'll come to why not in a minute. Since Roma wrote his famous thing that the price mechanism is destroyed by the lack of scarcity, because information goods, if they are copyable, then have to be protected legally, and that's the only reason they have a price, like an iTunes track, because try copying one for nothing. Since he wrote that, something else has become more obvious, and something I'm writing about in my book, Post-Capitalism, which comes out in 2015. And that is, physical goods increasingly have a high information content. Well, I don't mean the tablet you have in front of you, but a jet engine, a turbofan, increasingly has content in it. You know that a drug is just a formula made into bits of powder. But also a turbofan is increasingly that. It is the crystal metallurgy that enables the blades to run at a certain speed without bending. It is the airflow. It's the thermodynamic knowledge. I think we have to begin to understand physical goods as having some of the characteristics of info goods, and it's not far off, whereas you can copy and paste a poem, you could copy an MP3. We're not far off, and in fact, through 3D printing, we've got the crude form of it, of copying and pasting objects and things. This is already in use. 3D printing is already in use in so many things. This is the crucial thing, because it destroys the price mechanism that has existed for 200 years in capitalism. But there's another crucial thing, which I'll come to. Before we do, what have been the corporate responses to information's special characteristic? 3 responses. One is to monopolize it, so to protect it. So you say the reason you can't all own iTunes is because Steve Jobs is going to sue your ass, or his next person, the guy who now runs Apple. Okay? That is the only logical response. I would argue that's why the tech upsurge has created only monopolies. The first thing you do, I've got this, I'm a startup. Right, we need to become a monopoly, otherwise our information, our IP is not defensible. We can't have 3 Googles. You can't have 3 Facebooks. There's 4 big accountancy firms, but you can't have 4 big social media engines doing the same thing. The second one, which Kevin Kelly wrote about, is to skate on the edge of chaos, to recognize that abundance is tanking the price of everything, but that it creates demand, and that if you can actually skate between that, i.e. you can be the cheapest, just as the price of an e-book is falling on this curve, if you can get inside that curve, you can make money. And the third one is the rise of non-market forms of economic life. Wikipedia is one. All the communes and co-ops created in places like Catalonia, which Castells writes about after the financial crash, are another. Many of us work on the life side of the work-life balance, and we create things that are not easily categorized as commodities in the old capitalist way. Yochai Benkler, in The Wealth of Networks, has described in detail the birth of these non-market forms of production. Now, what do? Wikipedia has wiped out Encarta, Encyclopedia Britannica. So it wiped out an analog product, and it wiped out a digital product which could not be defended in the way that Paul Roma wrote, because it is free. And just imagine that. The free wipes out the paid for. It's the first example we have, but it might not be the last.